let's talk about what's happening in Los Angeles. It's June 2025 and things have gotten a little intense. The whole situation kicked off on Friday, June 6th. US Immigration and Customs Enforcement, you know them as ICE, started a series of large-scale raids across the city. They targeted places like the Fashion District and even a Home Depot parking lot in Westlake, areas known for having many immigrant workers. As you can imagine, people were not happy about this. This wasn't some quiet operation. It was big, it was public, and it directly affected families and communities who were just trying to go about their day. It felt less like law enforcement and more like an invasion to many residents. In response to these raids, the people of Los Angeles took to the streets. At first, the protests were what you'd expect. People gathered with signs, they chanted slogans, and they marched peacefully to make their voices heard. They centered their demonstrations around federal buildings in downtown LA, like the Roybal Federal Building, to send a clear message to the government. The core of the message was simple: stop these raids. They argued that these actions were tearing families apart and creating a climate of fear. For many, this was a fight for their neighbors, their friends, and the very soul of their city, which prides itself on its diversity. But as the days went on, the mood began to shift. While most people during the day remained peaceful, the night started to look different. Some groups, often described as Black Bloc or anarchists, became more confrontational. We're talking about more than just chanting. There were reports of rocks and hammers being thrown at buildings and police lines. Commercial-grade fireworks were set off, not for celebration, but to cause chaos. This mix of peaceful protest and pockets of violence created a very tense and unpredictable situation. It became a story with two faces: the daytime marches for justice and the nighttime clashes filled with anger and destruction. This escalation is what grabbed the headlines. Suddenly, the focus wasn't just on why people were protesting, but how they were protesting. The initial cause, the ICE raids, started getting buried under images of vandalism and confrontations with police. It's a classic story. A legitimate grievance gets overshadowed by the actions of a few. The peaceful majority found their message competing with the noise of the more aggressive elements. And this complex dynamic, this blend of chaos and controlled demonstration, set the stage for a massive response from the authorities, which would only add more fuel to an already raging fire. When the situation in downtown LA started getting heated, the authorities decided to respond in a big way. The Los Angeles Police Department, or LAPD, was the first line of defense. They came out in full force, using what they call less lethal munitions to control the crowds. This is a nice way of saying they used rubber bullets, pepper balls, and a whole lot of tear gas. If you were downtown, you probably saw police on horseback and heard the pop of flashbang grenades. The LAPD declared multiple unlawful assemblies, which is basically the official term for everyone go home now before we make you. Over a few days, around 400 people were arrested. To make sure people followed the go home now order, Louisiana's Mayor Karen Bass declared a local emergency. This came with a strict curfew for a 1 square mile area of downtown, from 8 p.m. to 6 a.m. The official reason was to stop bad actors and prevent more businesses from being looted, as about 23 had already been hit. They even closed the ramps on and off the 101 freeway in the area, basically putting a small section of the city on lockdown. This was a serious move. A curfew tells you that the city government believes it has lost control of the streets and needs to take drastic measures to get it back, turning a part of a major American city into a temporary no-go zone. Then things got even more serious. President Trump, watching from Washington, decided the local police weren't enough. He did something that hasn't happened since 1965. He federalized the California National Guard without the governor's permission. Suddenly, we had over 4,000 National Guard troops mobilized for Los Angeles. These soldiers were tasked with protecting federal property, like courthouses and office buildings. They weren't supposed to be patrolling the streets or arresting people. That was still the LAPD's job. But seeing soldiers in military gear standing guard in your city is a powerful and for many a very frightening image. It changes the entire feel of the situation. And if that wasn't enough, the federal government decided to send in the Marines. Yes, the actual US Marines. About 700 of them from a base in 29 Palms were ordered to deploy to LA. This move took the response to a whole new level. You've gone from local cops to state soldiers to one of the most elite fighting forces in the world. The official line was that they were also just there to guard federal buildings. But having Marines on standby for a domestic protest is a huge deal. It showed just how wide the gap was between how local leaders and the federal government wanted to handle the unrest. The decision to send in federal troops created a massive political fight. California's Governor Gavin Newsom and LA's Mayor Karen Bass were furious. They publicly accused President Trump of abusing his power and making a tense situation much worse. From their perspective, they had a plan to handle the protests, and the arrival of federal troops felt like a hostile takeover. They argued that bringing in the military against the wishes of the state was an unconstitutional overreach. It was like your dad calling in a SWAT team because you and your brother were arguing too loudly in your room. It felt like a massive and unnecessary escalation. In response to this, the state of California decided to take the Trump administration to court. Governor Newsom and the state's Attorney General, Rob Bonta, filed a lawsuit. They claimed the federalization of the National Guard was illegal and an attack on states' rights. This wasn't just a political disagreement anymore, it was a full-blown legal battle between one of the nation's largest states and the federal government. This conflict also got the attention of other leaders. 22 other Democratic governors released a statement supporting California, calling Trump's actions an alarming abuse of power. It became a national issue, with states drawing lines in the sand against the White House. Of course, President Trump had his own opinions, and he wasn't shy about sharing them. He called Governor Newsom and Mayor Bass incompetent for not being able to stop the protests immediately. He labeled the protesters paid insurrectionists, suggesting they weren't real citizens with real grievances. He even threatened to invoke the Insurrection Act, a law that would give him even more power to use the military on U.S. soil. The president's view was clear. The protests were a rebellion that needed to be crushed with force, not a demonstration that needed to be understood. This created two completely different stories about what was happening in LA. This political war of words even went international. The new president of Mexico, Claudia Sheinbaum, jumped into the conversation. She condemned the United States for criminalizing migration, pointing out that the whole conflict started because of the ICE raids. Meanwhile, a poll showed that the American public was completely split on the issue. About 41% supported Trump's decision to send troops, while 44% opposed it. People were also divided on the protests themselves. It seemed nobody could agree on who the good guys and bad guys were, and the leaders of the country were more interested in fighting each other than in finding a solution. The protests in Los Angeles did not stay in Los Angeles. Like a spark catching on dry grass, similar demonstrations quickly popped up in other cities across the United States. People in New York, Chicago, Seattle, and Austin took to the streets to show solidarity with LA and to protest against ICE activities in their own communities. In Seattle, protesters set small fires near a federal building, and in Spokane, Washington, the situation got so intense that the mayor had to declare a state of emergency and set a curfew after more than 30 people were arrested outside an ICE facility. It was clear this was no longer just an LA story. It was a national movement. With protests spreading and tensions running high, another problem emerged: disinformation. False rumors and fake news began to spread like wildfire on social media. Officials had to constantly debunk stories that were designed to create more fear and anger. For example, a terrifying rumor went viral claiming that ICE was raiding an elementary school graduation. This was completely false, but it scared a lot of parents. People were also sharing old videos from protests back in 2020, showing burning police cars, and claiming the footage was from the current protests in LA. It's a reminder that in today's world, you have to be careful about what you believe online. This whole situation is a powerful example of how a local issue can quickly spiral into a national crisis. It all started with immigration raids in one city. That led to protests, which were met with a strong police and military response. That response then triggered a political and legal battle between state and federal governments, dividing the country. This chain of events shows how fragile things can be. It highlights deep disagreements in America about immigration, protest, and the role of government. It's not just about what's happening on the streets, it's about the bigger questions of who we are as a country and how we solve our problems. So as we watch this unfold, it's important to remember all the different layers. There are the real people who are afraid of being deported. There are the peaceful protesters who are demanding change. There are the few who are causing violence and destruction. There are the police trying to maintain order. And there are the politicians who are fighting for control. Understanding this complex picture is the first step. And more importantly, always check your sources. Because in a crisis filled with chaos, the truth is often the first casualty. Be smart and stay informed.